Welcome to Uniquely UCF Sociology, a podcast production of the Department of Sociology at the University of Central Florida. I'm your host, Dr. Ramon Hinojosa. Uniquely UCF Sociology is a podcast that explores the research and creative efforts of those who are doing the good work of sociology. You want to know what sociology is and what contributions sociology makes to improving our lives? Well, you've come to the right podcast. It's Uniquely UCF Sociology. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Amy Reckdenwald, a tenured associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Reckdenwald is a member of the Violence Against Women cluster at UCF. She's also a member of the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention's National Advisory Committee. Dr. Reckdenwald's primary research areas are violent victimization, domestic violence, and intimate partner homicides. Her work explores the ways that gender norms, gendered inequalities, and economic deprivation, along with the availability of domestic violence resources within geographic areas, influences violence and homicide offending. Her scholarship is supported by national grants and is published in many of the leading academic journals like Criminology, Homicide Studies, and the Journal of Criminal Justice. Dr. Reckdenwald teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in criminology, domestic violence, research methods, and statistics here in the Department of Sociology. Hello, Dr. Reckdenwald, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to be here.
Well, thanks for taking your time to chat with us about all things sociology. So to begin, if I could ask, where did you attend school for your PhD? And if you can remember, what was your dissertation about?
Sure, yeah. So I attended the University of Florida for my PhD in criminology. I graduated in 2008, so it's been a little bit of time. And my dissertation was focused on examining trends in intimate partner homicide over time. So during that time, we were seeing a lot of declines in intimate partner homicide. So I was particularly interested in whether domestic violence resources, as well as various structural level forces, such as marriage rates or the status of women in terms of income, employment, and education, if they had any impact on these declines. I also looked at levels of economic deprivation, including percent employed and those living in poverty, and then whether domestic violence resources also impacted those changes.
Interesting. So when you say domestic violence resource, can you give the audience some sense of what that is or how that might impact victimization?
Yeah, specifically for this project, I looked at the presence of domestic violence shelters. So if they were available, I was looking at the city level. So in the particular city, how many were available and whether or not they were available, with the idea that if there were domestic violence resources available or domestic violence shelters, women in abusive relationships could leave those relationships and seek shelter, thereby kind of preventing intimate partner homicide in the long run.
So I suppose that makes a lot of sense, right? If you've got someplace to go that's safe and welcoming to get out of an abusive relationship or situation, it makes it more likely that victims would do that, correct?
Yes, definitely. And definitely if there's, support that should impact both, intimate or female perpetrated intimate partner homicide, as well as male perpetrated intimate partner homicide. So it's very important to have those resources available.
So what is the difference between something like domestic violence and, say, intimate partner violence? Are those not the same thing, or how are they different?
Well, people use different terms. So really, when I think of domestic violence, I think of it more along kind of a broader definition of who it would include in those types of relationships. So more just within the household, although domestic violence could just be referred to as, intimate partners. I tend to use the term intimate partner violence when I'm specifically talking about intimate partners, so spouses, boyfriend, girlfriends, any kind of intimate relationships. It could also include ex-partners in that breakdown, but really there's kind of this tricky kind of overlap between the two.
Okay. So I know that you're affiliated with both the Department of Sociology and with the Violence Against Women cluster. And so I'm curious to know how that work overlaps in the professional work that you do.
Well, in the cluster, it's really nice because it's a interdisciplinary group of faculty members. So there's a number of us from the sociology department, including me, but the social work department, criminal justice department, as well as population health sciences. So we're really all focused on conducting research that helps prevent violence against women. So it's a really nice, well, it's just really nice to be able to work with a group of faculty who have the same interests and all are kind of working towards the same goal.
Oh, very interesting. And so the Violence Against Women cluster, is that a center at UCF, or is this just a working collaborative group of faculty who are interested in the same areas?
It's more along the second lines where it's not a center, but it is a group or cluster of faculty members that all are working towards the same goal. There are faculty members that were hired to be part of the cluster, and then there are affiliated faculty members. So I'm a affiliated faculty member because I was already at UCF once the cluster began.
Yeah, okay. So what about the work that you're doing now? I'm assuming that it does involve some work that you've already talked about with intimate partner violence, but maybe you could give us a sense of what's happening and what sort of scholarship you're working on currently.
Yeah, definitely. My most recent research actually looks at non-fatal strangulation use in intimate partner relationships. So just to kind of summarize what that even means and what's going on with that, non-fatal strangulation is actually a common form of intimate partner violence, but it's not fully understood. It's a powerful method of control used by an abusive partner to really show that they can take their partner's life at any time, along with a host of negative outcomes like swelling, bruising, but even strokes or death. Past non-fatal strangulation increases the odds of homicide of women by 750%. So
wow.
due to its seriousness, strangulation is a felony offense in Florida, yet with the lack of corroborating evidence commonly characteristic of non-fatal strangulation, offenders, it makes it very difficult for offenders to actually be held accountable for this. Most may think that strangulation would be easily identified, maybe by bruising around the neck, but in reality, only about maybe half of victims have any kind of visible injury to show that a strangulation actually occurred. So to remedy this, I collaborated on a multi-agency criminal justice and public health effort to implement the first non-fatal strangulation prevention program in Florida, which was successful in holding offenders accountable. It actually increased the filing rate. And this program was designed to train law enforcement officers on how to identify and document non-fatal strangulation. And it also provided no-cost forensic medical exams to victims to further collect evidence. And my work in this area actually ended up me being invited to join the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention's Forensic Medical Committee, which is really geared towards spreading awareness on non-fatal strangulation and impacting practice and policy.
And is part of the issue with being difficult to hold perpetrators accountable that the victims are unlikely to come forward, or is it that medical and law enforcement personnel just hadn't recognized this as an issue?
There's a lot of different challenges to prosecuting non-fatal strangulation, and you've named a number of them. So sometimes victims don't come forward and tell law enforcement. They don't seek medical attention for non-strangulation injuries or non-fatal strangulation injuries. But yes, police officers weren't able to identify strangulation injuries and document it for evidence purposes. In Florida, they're given very little information about strangulation in their training on domestic violence. So it's not surprising to think that they wouldn't be able to correctly identify it because it is very difficult to identify if you don't know what you're looking for.
And so this work, as you mentioned, led to you being invited to work with the Training Institute on Strangulation. And so I'm curious to know what is the organization and what is the work that they do and the sort of reach that they might have?
Yeah, this is a national organization. that has been working for a number of years on spreading awareness on non-fatal strangulation and improving or impacting practice and policy. So this one of the projects, I can give you an example that I'm working on with the committee or a group of members of the committee, is that they created a non-fatal strangulation investigative form for law enforcement in order to improve evidence collection. So we are working with a couple different law enforcement agencies to test out this program, kind of a pilot program, to see if this investigative form actually improves prosecution within of these cases. And the real goal is to have some hard evidence that we can then take to every police agency in the nation, and they can use this investigative form to document non-fatal strangulation.
So now the research geek in me wants to know what sort of evidence do you look at? Are you looking at records? Are you looking at reports? What sort of data do you collect to give you some indication that this might be working?
Yeah, so we're collecting police agency data, so police records of strangulation cases, as well as prosecution outcomes of those cases. So we're following, from initial contact with police officers to prosecution in the criminal justice system, and then comparing cases that did not use the investigative form with cases that did use the investigative form, to see if filing rates are higher. And, we might look at charging and sentencing decisions.
Well, fantastic. So for members of our future student body who are out there listening to this podcast, and let's say that they wanted to come study here and study with you, what might they expect in terms of mentorship with you?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first and foremost, I love working with students. It's really the best part of my job. I really enjoy having students get involved in my research projects, but I'm also willing to mentor students on their individual research projects along the way too. Students can expect to learn about and experience pretty much every stage of the research project, from designing it to disseminating the results, either through some sort of academic publication or maybe a conference presentation, but even possibly a community, a report to our community partners if we're working with partners in the community. Most of my research is quantitative in nature, so a student would definitely be involved in looking at quantitative data and analyzing it. I generally do a lot of my research analyzing national level data sources and then agency records, particularly police records. So students would gain experience working with these larger data sets, from data on the census, the National Dept reporting system, Uniform Crime Reporting Program, supplemental homicide reports, as well as law enforcement records. So depending on my current project, students may gain experience in managing these kind of large data sets, or also gain experience collecting primary data.
That's fantastic. So even if they decide not to go into the same area of study, they'll have some very solid skills with database management, database merging, perhaps the analysis of the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important. And as students graduate, that they will be able to know where to find data, actually download the data, possibly merge data sets, analyze data. So I think that's really important.
Oh, absolutely. So what do some of the students do after they've come to work with you and then they move on, whether they get a master's or a PhD? Where do you tend to find your students going?
Most of my students go the academic route. So they'll go into research or teaching positions, but I've also had some students go more of an applied route. I had an MA student that worked on the strangulation prevention project with me, who interned at the sheriff's office, who is now a victim advocate there.
Oh, wow. That's excellent. And so they go all over the place, right? Not just academia, but to these local and state, maybe even national agencies as well.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, if you could select one piece of research or a creative work that you're most proud of, what would that be? What would you want people to know about your work?
It would really be, this is tough, a tough question. I think it would be really any of my work on non-fatal strangulation. And it's, I have a number of pieces that have come out in the last, 5 or 6 years. But awareness on non-fatal strangulation is surprisingly relatively new. And with it being a significant risk factor for the homicide of women, more research really needs to be done. States have made non-fatal strangulation a felony, but this is just one step in the right direction. Without training and accurate evidence collection, offenders really, they're just not able to be held accountable, even if it is a felony offense in a particular state.
And so the research that you're doing is really sort of driving these policy recognitions. Is that correct?
Yes, I hope so. Yes.
Well, if I could have you share a paper or two, or 4 or 5, if you're inclined, we'll put those in the link with the podcast, so that if members of our audience have an interest in looking at your work, that they'll have the resources to do so.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, Dr. Reckdenwald, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I appreciate your willingness to sit down and chat with us about the fantastic and important work that you do in saving people's lives.
Great. Thank you for having me.
I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for taking time from your busy day as we listen in to discuss all things that are uniquely UCF sociology. This is Dr. Ramon Hinojosa saying thank you, and we hope you'll join us next week.